Rose between two thorns, or thorn between two roses?
G'day. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me at the back? Excellent. The sound sounds amazing tonight. Thank you, Shannon. I feel very vocal, very heard. Thank you all for coming to our regular Politics in the Pub. This is our special budget wrap edition, and this is why I love Canberra, you guys, because only in Canberra would this many people rock up for a huge and in-depth chat about the federal budget. I love you all. Thanks for coming. We live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I just do want to note that in 2024, it is our 30th anniversary at the Australia Institute as Australia's leading think tank. Thank you very much. 30 years of big ideas, and you will also see on your seats tonight that our esteemed leader, Richard Dennis, is about to do a tour called Unequal Australia that includes an event here in Canberra. There should be a flyer here on everyone's seats where you should be able to see if you can snatch yourself a ticket for that. And don't forget, if you want to support the Australia Institute, you can head on over to our website and sign up to be a regular giver. And you can do that at australiainstitute.org.au or indeed on the reverse side of your flyer there this evening. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, it is federal budget time. I'm sure you were all up late reading those budget papers, as were we, but we're going to get stuck in this evening. Obviously, there's a lot happening in the economy. Inflation is coming down, but still a problem. Lots of people are struggling to make ends meet. And as always, the Treasurer really struggles to fund everything that needs to be funded. Many things are just unaffordable, as we keep hearing about. Richard, tell us about this year's budget.
Oh, thanks, Eb, and thanks everyone for coming. Look, unfortunately, well, let me start by quoting Ross Gittins last night. I think his take kind of captures it quite nicely. He said budgets are about priorities, and this budget reveals that Anthony Albanese doesn't seem to have any. Which is harsh, but I think a fair reading of the budget. There were little things in there for everybody. It was Ebony that introduced me to the idea of movies putting Easter eggs in. There were little things for lots of people, and rightly so. There were things on housing affordability, mainly around rent assistance. There was the small changes to HECS that were leaked out before. You kind of, and Greg and I and others at the Institute kind of went through a list a couple of weeks ago and went, what are the things they're going to have to do? And what do you think they'll end up cooking up surplus to be? And I think we said about $10 billion to the surplus. These are arbitrary numbers, by the way. Pretty much they ticked all the little boxes. I did think going into the budget last night that there would be one big priority, which is always a risk, but I thought there'd be one. But I was wrong about that. I thought they would kind of have a little revenue surprise that they hadn't told everyone about, and then say, look at this thing we really particularly care about. Now, I'm not saying they don't care about anything. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that if you want to change the country, you have to change the budget. If you want to have more of things, if you want to have a bigger, better health system, you need to put a lot more money into health. If you want to have a smaller fossil fuel industry, you have to stop subsidising it. You're not going to drive changes in the direction of the economy if you're not making big changes to the budget. And last night, those big changes weren't there. So by definition, that's steady as she goes. That's, hey, Australia, look in the mirror. You're doing fine. Just a little bit of a tinker.
I'm a woeful host. You'd never think I've been doing this for 10 years. I forgot to introduce Richard Dennis, our Executive Director, and Greg Jericho, our Chief Economist. Give them a round of applause.
There'll be sanctions tomorrow.
Greg, you were in the lockup and you obviously write your regular column for The Guardian. What stuck out to you in this year's budget?
Yeah, thanks, Seb. This was, I think, my 13th or 14th budget lockup that I've done, which sounds a lot, but I'm in the Guardian lockup and I've got Mike Bowers there who can remember Keating delivering budgets. So there's never any bragging on my part. It was really weird. We were all in there and going, okay, we knew that was coming. And then we'd flip the page. Yeah, we knew that was coming. We knew that. And, oh, there's an energy repo, but that was kind of expected. And then we kept waiting for where's the big sort of, okay, this is what the budget will be about. And as Rich was saying, there was a lot of little nibbles of things, a lot of things which sounded good, but when you looked at them, you went, like, for example, I mean, a classic, and I think it almost encapsulates the budget, was the decision to give the prac funding for nurses and others who are at uni and going off and doing their prac work, where, you know, for many people at uni, they've got a job, they're working in a restaurant or doing whatever, and if you go off and suddenly have to do 6 months worth of prac, you have to give up that job, and it is a brutal thing that actually causes many to drop out. And so I heard, oh, they're funding this. I thought, great, excellent. Oh, $8 an hour. It's like, you know, it was good headline. Don't read any further, please. And, you know, even things like we'll get to all of them, but, you know, even things like the tax subsidies for green hydrogen and for things, you think, oh, yeah, that $6 billion sounds a lot. And then you dig and you go, yeah, nah. And it was that all the way through. I've sort of, people have like been saying to me in interviews, you know, is this a pre-election budget? I'm like, well, I hope not, because it's kind of that budget which again encapsulates a bit of the government where they've handed their homework in on time. We got the surplus, give us the gold star, but that ain't going to really win anything and it's certainly not changing the country.
Can I just add something else? So when Greg was talking, like, economists are terrible at predicting things, right? Like, two economists here. Yeah. No, it's the other ones. They're all crap. Economists don't have a crystal ball, but it's actually really easy to predict some things. And certainly if you're not kind of worried about decimal places. And the easy way to predict some things is to kind of ask, well, what happened yesterday? Because that's probably pretty much what will happen tomorrow. Or what happened last year? Because that'll pretty much that's the default. And there's wobbles around that, but there's just such enormous momentum in so much that we think of as economics. Why am I talking about this? Because I just had a research idea for us to work on tomorrow. There's a few economists here in the room.
Can someone take notes up the back there? Thank you.
No, it's pretty simple. Basically, every budget, you can kind of look at the new measures and compare them to the size of the total budget. All right, so total spending last night would have been around 700 billion, $700,000 million. So when you hear the government announced $1 billion for something, that's 1/700th of the total spend.
The total new spend for this year was 11 billion.
Right.
So 11 billion new out of a total 700 billion.
And that was my guess. I'm thinking in the last 20 years, that's the smallest new measures to total spend ratio. That is the definition of conservative. Yeah. That is the definition of the status quo, of the 700 billion to play with. Even if you don't want to collect more tax, even if you don't want to get more revenue, just in the budget envelope of 700 bill that just came in with no change, they changed 11 of the 700. That is very conservative.
So I just want to put it in context for people, the budget itself and the things coming into it that we were hearing about on the news every night was like, it can't be inflationary, and a lot of economists in the media kind of talking about, oh, it's got to be working in concert with the RBA and with monetary policy, and you know, there's all these things that the government has to weigh up that go into a budget. Is that the reason why it's so bitsy, Richard? Because there's, you know, so much at stake?
No. There's always a good reason to not help poor people, right? That's it. There's just always a good reason. Unemployment could be high. We could have a budget deficit. We could have a budget surplus. Like, it doesn't matter. What's the constant in Australian budget life? It's never a good time to help poor people. If we were in budget deficit, we'd be told we can't possibly afford to increase unemployment benefits. We're in budget surplus. Well, if we increase the unemployment benefit, it will cause inflation. Might it just be that we don't want to help poor people? Not you, but that bastard sitting next to you, right? There's something about Australia that everyone else doesn't want to do this. So, yeah, look, the government's come up, there's all sorts of pressures on the government why they should do something or shouldn't do something. Unemployment benefits will cause inflation, submarines won't. Tackling climate change will cause budget deficits, $300 billion worth of tax cuts won't. Again, what's the predictive model? What's the simple way to understand what's happening? Powerful groups are getting what they want, vulnerable groups aren't. We're a rich country. We make nasty choices.
Greg, I want to come to the surplus.
Told you to be fun.
Laugh a minute.
Yeah, thanks for coming to me after that. Yeah.
No, but I mean, for a long time, the Australia Institute has been trying to debunk this idea that delivering a budget surplus is some kind of a worthy achievement. The Labor government's now delivered two. I saw some cheeky person on Twitter with one of the coalition's Back in Black mugs from the year that they didn't deliver a budget surplus. But, you know, they've done that twice now. But is that going to put to bed this idea that it's a worthy goal? Or how much do you think we're still going to have to contending with this as the bar that a government has to meet to be a good economic manager?
Yeah, I mean, Christ. I've been trying for the entire time I've been writing for Guardian, which is now over 10 years to, in fact, my second column was actually saying we should be more in debt. That was the headline. I would like to say it would end it because common sense suggests it should end it. Okay, we've had two budget surpluses, the first budget surpluses since consecutive surpluses since the mining boom. In the March quarter, Australians spent as a collective less in the shops than we had the 3 months earlier. That's not a sign of us feeling well off, feeling good, feeling happy, feeling rich. And yet we've got the second surplus in a row. Surely that's a sign of things are great. No, it's got nothing to do with it. But unfortunately, because we've seen the Treasurer come out and say we've delivered two surpluses in a row, that narrative is incredibly tough to shift. I thought it was going to shift during the pandemic when we had huge record deficit, and you think everyone saw, yeah, that's a good idea. You know, give out some JobKeeper, double job seeker, do all this stimulus to keep the actual economy from going into a Great Depression. And you think, okay, can we divorce it? But no, we're still on the damn thing of surplus. And as I say, it's, you know, it was delivered because if you don't like, you know, we got more tax than, and that's why mainly they were able to deliver a surplus. And so I've seen some people say, oh, it's disgraceful that the 23.9% tax cap, which was the Scott Morrison invented tax cap, has been breached. And it's like, well, one way that could have been breached or kept under that is if more people had been unemployed, because then they would have paid less income tax. So is that what you're saying? No, you know, it's just such a stupid
we can
debate.
impoverish ourselves to riches.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the surplus, it does not matter to you. You no one would be thinking, I'm feeling rich because the government's got a surplus. We know households are actually kind of feeling worse off than they have for a very long time, and yet you'll get to the press conference today, and they'll be asked about, oh, how come you're not going to be delivering a surplus next year? What's gone wrong? Shouldn't you have cut back? They look at things like, oh, it's the biggest spending budget of all time, and they forget that, well, we didn't always have an NDIS. That's a fair bit of spending. Are you saying we should just dump that so that we can say, oh, it's not as big a spend? All of these absurd propositions that we have to deal with.
I do want to ask you specifically about some of those cost of living measures that were in there. So we've obviously talked a lot about, in the context of not wanting to put upwards pressure on inflation, that the government can intervene where it has control over prices. We saw that in the last budget. Were there any measures like that in this one that were really kind of directly targeted there?
Yeah, the big one was the $2.6 billion this year that's been spent on giving everyone a $300 energy rebate, and that's it. In effect, it's actually something that a colleague of ours, Matt Grudenoff, wrote an excellent article last week where he basically said, here's 6 things the government could do to actually lower inflation. One of them was an energy rebate. The other was rental assistance, and the government did rental assistance as well. It's, there has been some criticism saying, oh, it should have been means tested. And yeah, that's a fairly decent argument to have. But in terms of actually reducing inflation, the figures, and they seem pretty robust, it's going to reduce about 0.5 percentage point off inflation. So instead of 3.5%, it'll be 3%. That has a whole lot of other rolling impacts. And it's just, I think we need to push past this view. Not only, the old surpluses are terrible, but get out of this view of the only way to tackle inflation is we got to jack up interest rates. There's nothing else we can do, because no one here is, over the past year, has been going, I really need a lot more electricity. I've been wanting to use a lot more gas. Prices are going up, not because we've all been using a lot more, but because things happening overseas, companies taking advantage of those things to raise the price of gas, raise the price of coal, and which all go into our energy bills. And so a government should look at that and go, well, if we raise interest rates, that's just going to smash you again. Let's help you out during this temporary period. We're hearing all this absurd stuff about, but that only affects measured inflation, as though there's some unmeasured inflation out there. That's the real stuff. The stuff you can't measure, that's the real inflation. It's a case of, there's a reason why cigarettes don't cost $5 a pack now. That's because of government intervention. They're very good at raising inflation when they want to increase excises. If they cut excises on tobacco, they would actually reduce inflation. That's kind of what they've done here with energy bills.
I'm glad you've mentioned the tobacco excise, because I want to come next to the petroleum resource rent tax, Richard, our favourite. So supporters of the Australia Institute, you might remember back in January when Richard at the press club talked about the fact that what raises more revenue than the petroleum resource rent tax? Well, start with the major one that you talked about at the press club.
Well, let me frame it up slightly differently first. In Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and give kids free university education. And in Australia, we subsidise our fossil fuel industry and charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. In Australia, we collect more revenue from HECS payments than our petroleum resource rent tax. Now, Economics 101 says tax things you want less of, subsidise things you want more of. Can I be any clearer about why we need new measures in the budget? We subsidise fossil fuels and charge kids a lot to go to uni. Other countries with natural resources like ours do the exact opposite. One of us is dumb. So yeah, look, it's really kind of shocking. And at the moment, well, in last year's budget, the government announced they were going to increase the PRRT, and they were going to collect more from the PRRT. Greg, how'd that go?
Yeah, they said their measure is going to raise by $2.4 billion in May last year. And then in December, when they did the budget update, they said, oh, look, the price of gas has gone up, but we're going to revise down our PRRT take. 2.4 billion, I think, is a good figure. So, and then this year, last night, again, revised down even a little bit more. I mean, we talk about HECS. I mean, the classic was, we always like to be mischievous and look for other things that actually raise more money than HECS. Generally, you don't think of luxury car tax, but this year, people buying luxury car taxes contributed more to paying for public expenditure, more for nurses' salaries, more for teachers' salaries, more for Medicare than did gas companies paying PRRT. It's just,
I mean, you have
riding on the back of luxury car owners. That's Australia.
the backbone of the economy.
I thought it was the kids at the uni. It's the luxury cars what did it.
I mean, I'm no economist, but you have to be trying pretty hard if gas prices are going up to bring in less revenue.
Look,
how does that work?
Well, it's better than that. Like back when I think Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, but certainly under the coalition, they had an inquiry into why the PRRT collected bugger all tax. What was the name of the guy who did it? Former Treasury official. It'll come to me. No. Feels like it starts with C. Anyone? Any nerds in the room? Tax nerds? Who did the? Doesn't matter. No, not Ken Henry. Doesn't matter. So Liberal government says we've got this PRRT and bugger me, it doesn't collect any money. Let's have an inquiry into that. So they did an inquiry into that, and Rod Campbell, our research director, and I wrote a submission, and we went to give evidence. And, we're both giving them all sorts of ways about how you could improve the PRRT and how it could collect more evidence. And we were copping a complete grilling from these people having a go at us. And what about this? What about that? And at some point I said, aren't you trying to fix this problem? We came to help you solve your problem and you're having a go at us. And I remember walking down the corridors of the Treasury building and saying to Rod, was I yelling in there? And he said, no, but you were rather blunt. So to suffice it to say, the inquiry found that there was no problem. Carmody. I think it was Carmody.
Yep.
Anyway, so we had an inquiry into why it collected no tax. The guy running the inquiry found that there was no problem that it was collecting no tax. This government
working as designed,
said the gas industry. This government says we should make it collect more tax. Let's make it collect more tax. Oh, even when the gas price went up, it collects less tax.
Well, I mean, first they had to run by the options to the gas companies, bring them in for a bit of a talk and said, look, we got two options which probably might work, but we've also got a third option that we just sort of came up with. What do you reckon? And they said, we like the third option. And so the government brought that in, and it was. I mean, notionally, if it was going to raise $2.4 billion more tax over the 4 years, which, it's just an extraordinary small amount of money, but it would have actually raised the PRRT take by 30%. Now, if the gas industry or mining industry, if you went and said over the next 4 years, we're going to increase the amount of tax you're going to pay by 30%, you'd be expecting a mother of all campaign saying you're killing us. And instead, last year when the government announced this, that very night, the gas industry lobby group put out a media release saying, please pass this with bipartisan support. Please do it now. Do it now. Please do it now.
Hit us with the stick.
Please do it, because they realised they'd conned the government, or the government allowed themselves to be conned. It looks like a lot of money. All it was shuffling a bit around. And, and they're still pleading with everyone to pass it, because they're hoping that this 90% cap on the amount they're able to deduct, that everyone will say, oh, look, we've done it, we've solved it, and they can go on and keep reaping massive, massive profits.
Yeah, Richard, what happens in other resource countries when their commodity prices go up?
Well, has anyone here heard of, any of the oil states? Most of the Saudis think that high oil prices are good. No, this is kind of weird in Australia. You should kind of be a bit concerned about this, because in Australia, we hear oil prices and gas prices go up, and we're like, oh no, our electricity bill's going to go up. Oh no, our petrol prices are going to go up. When the Saudis hear the oil price is going to go up, they're like, ka-ching, ka-ching, the rest of the world's going to pay us a shit ton of money. That's how broken we are in Australia. We are the largest exporter of LNG in the world. We're the largest exporter of met coal in the world. We're the third largest fossil fuel exporter in the world. And when the price of the thing we export goes up, everyone's like, oh, now we're stuffed. Oh, man. Because our fossil fuel industry is overwhelmingly foreign owned. We don't get the money. They get the money. our Minister for Exporting Resources, Madeleine King, is representing the interests of the foreign-owned fossil fuel companies who make a fortune when the price of our petrol goes up and our electricity goes up. So, yeah, other countries that export enormous amounts of fossil fuels think the price of their fossil fuels going up is good. We have invented such a broken system that when we, the third largest fossil fuel exporter in the world, learn that fossil fuel export prices are going up, we're like, well, now we're in big trouble.
I mean, we heard in the budget this talk about we need to become a renewable energy superpower, and one thing that we've been sort of pointing out, we already are an energy superpower, but we act like we're minnows. Oh no, the world price for oil has changed and gas, and well, we just have to bobble along, and there is never any. And Japan needs more gas. Well, we've got no say over that. We better help them out.
We're very generous people.
We'll find we will find the gas now for the gas companies. Tell them where it is and say, please export it.
Well, as our climate director, Polly Hemming, tweeted last week, Madeleine King said we have to keep digging up and selling more gas because we can't leave Japan and Korea high and dry, to which she responded, but it's okay to drown the Pacific.
Mm.
We can't leave Japan and Korea high and dry. We've actually, we're apparently, for a country that's stingy when it comes to foreign aid, we're quite generous when it comes to solving other countries' energy problems. Apparently, Japan and Korea's energy needs are our national interest. This is bizarre. We're just a pathetic little country.
And I'm going to come back to the budget and just slightly digress to the future gas strategy, which was delivered last week. And we've done quite a bit of research into that. But just talking about solving other countries' energy poverty problems, people might not have noticed this, but we had plenty of critiques about that future gas strategy. But I want to just raise something that not a lot of people might have clocked, which is just a few months after the Voice referendum and that whole campaign that the government put its full weight behind, that future gas strategy quoted traditional elders kind of welcoming gas exploration and more gas production because of the energy poverty in Indigenous communities, which was very misleading if you read their actual submissions, which were basically pleading for renewable energy, in particular solar, in those communities because they're all on prepaid energy cards. So they run out all the time. They're stuck to diesel and things like that. They are crying out for us to be a renewable energy superpower in our own backyard. And, a lot of them asked for the quotes to be withdrawn because of how egregious that misleading representation of what they're asking for was. But I did want to stick with climate change, and we'll probably come back to how bad the future gas strategy was. But Richard, if we are looking at, there was a lot of green measures in this budget. We've got the Future Made in Australia kind of manufacturing push. If you weigh up all of the investments in making us a renewable energy superpower and getting to net zero compared to, fossil fuels, what picture emerges from the budget?
Catastrophic climate change. Let's be clear, tackling climate change is really simple. You need to reduce fossil fuel emissions. And no matter what words anyone says, no matter what they announce, you just have to ask the question, will that lead to lower greenhouse gas emissions? To be clear, Australia's emissions are rising, not falling. To be clear, the budget papers say we can expect the cost of the subsidies for diesel fuel to rise because diesel fuel consumption is going to rise. We're not getting rid of the subsidy, and there'll be a lot more diesel getting consumed. And of course, we're still opening new coal and we're opening new gas today. And Australia Institute put out some research this week saying all up across the nation around $14 billion in fossil fuel subsidies a year. So
That's up to.
That's up to. Yeah, more subsidies, more emissions. So to be clear, of course Australia can add value to its resources. Of course we should be trying to use our renewable energy and combine it with our iron ore to make green iron and even steel here in Australia. Of course we should. Of course we should look at whether we can manufacture solar panels or parts of solar panels or batteries. Of course we should. Like, it's just neoliberalism that said we couldn't. There's no reason Australia can't have a bigger manufacturing industry than it currently does. That said, manufacturing employs about 800,000 people today, about 800,000 people. The fossil fuel industry in its entirety employs about 60,000 people. So we have a big manufacturing industry compared to the fossil fuel industry. Small compared to other countries, but more than 10 times the size of our fossil fuel industry. And we talk about, wouldn't it be good if we had one? That's the political power of mining. But to be clear, you can't tackle climate change by building things. You have to tackle climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's not even Stevens if you open new gas and you open new coal and you burn more diesel and you build a solar panel factory. These are unrelated. Like, there's no offsets here. So yeah, in terms of the budget, there's some introductory measures to stimulate some manufacturing in Australia. Good, we should do it. But if you're not actually reducing emissions and you're still subsidising new coal and new gas to open, you're causing climate change. You're not tackling it.
Hayden and Eleanor, I think I've clocked that as another graph we need to produce and put on the socials tomorrow. I totally forgot to look at the time, and we are about to move into the portion of the evening where it is questions from the audience. I will ask people, particularly women. We never get enough women asking questions. So if you've got a burning question, please think of that and come up. We've got a microphone just here. And while you're thinking about that, because I forgot to look at the clock and warn you all, you've got another couple of minutes to think of this while I ask Greg another question. Sorry, did you want to?
Well, I was just going to add, Richard's absolutely right. You can't, and we saw in the gas trade, everything was about abatement, as though you can use more gas so long as it's abated somehow. But also in the transition, when we stop using fossil fuel to power our electricity, to power our manufacturing base, you do need to replace that with something. And so that's why things like green hydrogen are certainly worthwhile. But to give you an example of the lack of ambition, the lack of, are you really serious about this? You've heard the $6-7 billion in tax subsidies over the decade. And you think, well, that's a lot of money, $6 billion. Jim Stanford, our director of the Centre for Future Work, he looked at what the American sort of Infrastructure Reduction Act, which is basically their big expenditure in renewable energy manufacture, was. To do it here in Australia on an equivalent basis of the size of our economy, we would have needed to put in about $13 billion a year, which, again, sounds like a lot, but remember, the first year of the stage 3 tax cuts are going to be $21 billion. So if you want to choose to do something, you can choose to do it. But also, our really good researcher, Matt Ryan, actually crunched the numbers on, okay, well, they're budgeting for $6-7 billion of worth of loans and things for green hydrogen. How much hydrogen is that actually going to produce? And he worked out the sum total of petajoules of gas, of hydrogen, that is going to be produced at its peak each year is about 2% of the entire amount of LNG that we export every year. And you can say, oh, we need to increase that up to 100%, but actually what we also got to do is decrease that LNG and also maybe tax the hell out of that LNG so it can pay for us to start actually increasing the green hydrogen side of things. So it's a real case of it's a huge problem. It's obvious what needs to be done, but you actually got to be serious about it. And if you're not serious about it, you're going to come out with things that, $6 billion, that sounds good. Please don't look close, because you'll realise we're just mucking about, tinkering.
Thanks, Greg. So just a reminder, if you've got a question, come up here. We've got a microphone at the front, and I'd ask you to form an orderly line, and please, if you can make sure to ask a question and not give a speech, we would very much appreciate it. Our first question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If it's so obvious that all these solutions should be in place, why is it that if an election were held tomorrow, about 2/3 of first preference votes would go towards Labor and LNB? What you've alluded to is we have a bit of an economic and financial literacy crisis. Is it possible for economists to draw a straight line between our grossly unequal education system and our inability to vote properly and to think rationally about these sorts of issues?
Can I just? I'm not quite sure about the unemployment, the educational thing, but one of the things I would say is that you're saying 2/3. If you go back 20 years, that would be 80%. It's getting less and less, fewer and fewer people are deciding to choose Labor and Liberal. Probably the odds on we're not going to have a majority government next time around. People are really waking up to the fact that actually you don't need to choose one or the other, and actually things can get done. We've got more independence now than ever before, and I doubt that anyone really in those seats is thinking, gee, I wish I didn't have Monique Ryan as my member, because I seem to hear her every day on the news pushing my case, whereas who I used to have, he was really quiet. So I think there is that change. Yes, it's really hard to overcome the two-party system that's always going to dominate, but it's becoming less and less dominant, and at a certain point, the political parties are really going to have to wake up to that thing.
And some good news, to take your link seriously, perhaps the opposite's true, because a lot more people go to private schools these days, and a lot more people don't vote for the major parties these days. So the causation seems to be running the other way. But I don't think it's about education. I think that Australia has a pretty unique political system. We've had very stable kind of two-party political system for a long time. But as Greg said, it's been in decline for a long time, and the decline seems to be speeding up. And if you look around the world, the minority government that the Australian media are terrified of is actually the norm in most democracies. I mean, here we are in the People's Republic of the ACT, toiling away under the chaos of minority government for, 15 years now. You might have heard of what's it called? New South Wales currently has a minority government so unremarkable people don't even call it that. Like, it's just nonsense. And to be clear, even today, the Labor Party has a majority in the lower house. Majority, stable, control. Can they get a bill through the Senate without talking another party into it? No. There's nothing in the Constitution that mentions the Prime Minister. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the lower house is particularly important. And if you want to get a law made in Australia, it's got to pass two houses. And it's decades since a party had a majority in both houses. We're kind of always in minority government. It's meaningless. If the Albanese government had 4 fewer MPs, 4 fewer, it would be in minority government today, and it would still have to negotiate with the Greens in the upper house. It's just symbolism and culture and, a good marketing strategy. Don't waste your vote on an independent or a minor party because you won't get stable majority government. But I don't think people are falling for that.
And certainly if we look at the success of the last minority government compared to the chaos of the last majority Morrison government, they
and
really
also
struggled.
the last majority Senate gave us work choices.
Yeah, right. No one was a big fan of that. Next question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. That was very insightful. I guess my question kind of goes back to the climate crisis and the overall planetary emergency that we're in.
Oh, that again.
Yeah, sorry. We know that Australia is one of the richest countries in the world, right? And it's this, I guess, overconsumption and constant pursuit of growth, in a sense, that has caused these crises in the first place. So I guess as, one of the world's biggest fossil fuel exporters, what would embracing a different economic system look like in Australia that, I guess, respects our planetary boundaries? What would that look like? Would it be possible to pursue something like degrowth or donut economics?
Yeah. Well, can I go first? Look, of course. Absolutely. And, to sound like one of those blokes, I've written a couple of books on exactly that. one called Affluenza and one called Curing Affluenza. And, I actually think about a history project around this at the moment. We only invented GDP really around World War II. We had economies before then. How? How did the Egyptians get the pyramids built without quarterly GDP figures?
Slavery.
Well, if slavery is good for GDP, should we have it? How did Napoleon conquer Europe? So the idea that GDP is the economy and the economy is GDP, this is like a 7-year-old idea. We've got 7,000 years of recorded history. So of course we can do it differently. And I promise you in 100 years' time we will. We're just haggling about when, we're haggling about how, we're haggling about whether we cause 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, or 5 degrees before we change it. So of course change is possible. Change is inevitable. Our economy doesn't look anything like it looked like 100 years ago. And remember my trick about economics, our forecast? Just look back and project from trend. So if the economy keeps changing at the rate it's changed in the last 100 years, you won't recognize it. None of us will recognize it in 100 years. But that doesn't mean it's going to be better. That's up to us, right? But that's the thing that's terrifying for people who love the status quo, is saying, well, of course it's going to change. Let's talk about how. Of course it's going to change. What do you want more of? What do you want less of? These are simple democratic choices, which have been tricked into believing a kind of inevitable fall from the sky. The market did it. The economy did it. The market didn't decide to give $14 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies. That's not the market. The market didn't subsidize private health. The market didn't subsidize private health insurance. The market didn't build every effing road you've seen. We know how to build stuff. We know how to redistribute stuff. And isn't it great to just pretend that it's the market what did it? So, yeah, of course we can change it, and we will change it, and we have changed it. But it's a democratic question about, will we actually go and change it in the ways that perhaps you and I want, or will other people having another meeting somewhere tonight get some more fossil fuel subsidies? So my point is, of course we can. And just very quickly on the degrowth donut economics, I personally don't go in for that stuff, because I think what matters is the shape of the economy, not its size. And by that I mean that if we were tomorrow to get rid of capital gains tax discount, get rid of superannuation tax discounts, stick a carbon tax on, collect a couple of $100 billion in extra revenue, which wouldn't be a lot by world standards, and we spend all that money on public transport, renewable energy, great health, great education, GDP would go up. It would go up, and I would not be at all concerned, right? Because it's the shape of our economy. It is the things we buy, not the value of them, not the price of them, the material content of the things we buy that harms or doesn't harm the economy. So I don't care if GDP goes up or down. That's how apathetic I am about GDP. I don't want it to shrink because I don't care about it. I don't want it to grow because I don't care about it. What I want to do is radically change the shape of it, not get caught up in what number it should be.
And if we want to talk about radically changing the shape of things, sorry, host prerogative to butt in here. I'll get to your question in just a sec. But Greg, Richard just made me think about what the economy used to look like. And we're obviously in the middle of a housing crisis. The government used to build housing, correct?
Yeah, there used to be someone, I forget his name, he grew up in social housing. He's done quite well for himself, though. But there's a reason why Anthony Albanese talks about that and can talk about it, because actually back when he was growing up, it wasn't that uncommon. Back when he was doing it, about 10, 15% of every new house built was sort of public housing or social housing. Now it's about 1 and a bit. Again, this goes to what Richard was talking and what the question was about. So often a lot of the things that we are battling with is explain to people there is not a natural order to things. I saw an article today written by an economist talking about how the government had abandoned budgetary rules that have been in place for decades. And one of them was introduced by Scott Morrison in 2017. And yet, they treat these,
it feels like decades.
It's been, this is the order. Oh no, you can't meddle with negative gearing. That's just a natural way in which taxation is done. It's like, have you been to any other country? And we didn't have it for a bit. And the same with the capital gains discount. Oh no, you can't change. The capital gains discount was radically changed by John Howard in 1999. What's stopping us? The amount that students are paying for education was radically changed in 2021 by Scott Morrison. And yet now it's, it's what it is. And so much of what we do is it ain't
Can't fight City Hall.
Yeah, you can change these things. In fact, you're in power. That's one of the glorious things of being in power, is you get to make the choices. And I think that's one of the real disappointing things for us from this budget. Not that it's horrible, not that there's been massive cuts. It's just that they kind of chose to do nothing, to not grasp those levers of power and go, actually, this is how we want the country to look. Instead, they've gone, actually, the way Scott Morrison had it, it's all right. And we think it was really that what the election was about, and hopefully not.
Yeah. Next question. Thank you.
Look, so it's really insane that the government doesn't tax fossil fuels. And you can see how various governments are captured, Labor governments, captured by the fossil fuel industry. Interestingly, in the technical report that came with the future gas strategy, it has a chart which shows that 92% of Australia's energy consumption is derived from fossil fuels when you're taking account oil, gas and coal. But let's say the government...
Do you have a question?
Yep, here's a question. If the government found the courage to seriously tax fossil fuels, how would they withstand the campaigns from the fossil fuel lobby?
Fossil fuel companies don't get a vote. So the question is not how do you withstand the pressure from the fossil fuel companies? It's, does advertising by fossil fuel companies affect how you vote? Does it affect how other people vote? Sorry to sound ridiculous, we live in a democracy. The companies don't get a vote. Were the fossil fuel companies effective in taking on the carbon price? Yes. Was Kevin Rudd absolutely terrible at selling it? Yes. If that's our takeout message, all right, fine, we'll never do it. But you know what? 14 billion a year in subsidies, it pulls its head off. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of a carbon price. Let's have one. But why would you introduce a carbon price before you scrap the subsidies for it? This is not complicated stuff, and voters love the idea of getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. So, yes, we should not for a minute, and I certainly don't, underestimate the incredible power that the fossil fuel industry influences in Australian politics. But the one power it does not have is the power to vote. And I mean this, if most Australians wanted change, if they demanded it, we'd get it. And it doesn't help us, it doesn't help those of us who want change to kind of say, oh, but they're too powerful, we'll never win. That is their power. That's their trick. It's the Wizard of Oz. Right? There's almost no one works in the industry. It pays bugger all tax. They don't get a vote. Yet here we are going, oh, if only there was something we could do. It's not easy, but it is certainly not impossible.
I mean, we even have really good recent evidence. You think about the stage 3 tax cut changes. All before that, how much commentary did you read? No, they can't. It'd be political suicide to dump it, to change it. They're going to get crucified for breaking a promise. That's going to, be an albatross around the neck from now till the election. The Liberal Party will hammer them on it. News Limited are going to hammer on it. And they did it, and everyone, actually, we like you doing that. And suddenly the commentary, their polls didn't go up. So it was a failure. Suddenly it was meant to be this poll winning idea because the polls did go up. It's like, hang on, you were going to say it was going to kill them.
did the Liberals wage war against the changes to the stage 3 tax cuts?
Well, they did for a day until they realised
they
how
walked it back.
stupid.
It passed
You know.
with bipartisan
Yeah.
support. But again, it
They
was
didn't
impossible.
even have to have a vote. That's how popular.
Please
Yeah.
get it away from us.
By the way, one of our phrases we like to use at the Australian Institute, our job is to make the radical seem reasonable. And I think we did that pretty well with stage 3 tax cuts. And with your help, we can do it with the fossil fuel industry paying some tax.
And you know, as we say, everything sounds difficult, but as you know, Richard at the press club, when he made the point that more is paid on HEX and his PRT, the amount of sort of talkback media that we were getting, where people you think, oh no, you're kind of our enemies, were ringing you saying, can we have you on to talk because this sounds obscene. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article pointing out that people on JobSeeker are about 37% below the poverty line. I had Paul Murray on Sky News showing my graphs and going, this is disgraceful. How can we live in a society like this? It is amazing when you put forward clear, obvious examples and explain the problem, it becomes very difficult for powerful interest groups to go, oh no, it's a bit more complex than that. That's what they want. But when you say, actually, no, it's not. You're paying less money than uni students. They go, look, exports, we need those dollars. And you got to demystify it and push through it. And that's certainly what we try and do.
And I will just add one note to that, which is that if a gas company wants to pack up and take their business elsewhere, the gas is still here. They can't take it with them. And yeah, that makes it life much more difficult for them. So next question. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Do you want to line up? You can be the next one. Thanks.
Sorry, I should have stood there. But were you there? Sorry. I thought you know.
So yeah, we'll go this one and then.
In 2019, the shadow Labor government lost, from their perspective, the unlosable election. And one of the narratives I've often heard about why they lost is they had this very broad and very ambitious policy platform. I'm just wondering, to what extent do you think the Labor government that we see today has responded to that and taken on this kind of risk aversion that perhaps is part of the explanation to why we see budgets that are kind of unambitious?
Oh, look, it very much has, but to be clear, winners write history, which means it wasn't Labor that wrote the history of the 2019 election. It was the coalition. And your opponents never give you good advice. No, that's why winners write history, right? It's a literal thing. Winners write history. They write the history where they are the heroes and then they conquered the barbarians and we were nice. And winners write history. Why? Because they want to keep ruling. They want to keep winning. So writing the history is really important. So here's some history from the 2019 election that people don't seem to get. Labor went to the 2019 election thinking it would win comfortably. I wrote a whole essay on this, which started with, this is not the first draft of my essay, because the first draft was about why Labor won. I was commissioned by the Monthly to write an essay on the election, and they went to print 3 days after the election. So they said, well, we know Labor's going to win, so can you kind of write the piece beforehand, and then you can just tidy it up on the night. It was a long couple of days. But I started with saying, this is not the first draft. I got it wrong. So lots of people got it wrong. But here's a little bit of history. Labor went to the 2019 election thinking they would win comfortably. I thought they would. They thought they'd win by at least 5 to 7 seats. They thought they would lose 1 seat in Queensland and pick up a lot of seats in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. That's what they thought. They thought they'd lose 1 seat in Queensland and pick up a lot of seats in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. What actually happened was they lost 2 seats in Queensland, twice as many as 1. They lost 2. But they were going to win by 7 seats. They only lost 1 extra in Queensland. They won none in New South Wales. They won none in Victoria. They won none in South Australia. And they lost 2 in Tasmania. The 2 seats they lost in Tasmania are the lowest income electorates in the country, Bass and Braddon. Was it the franking credits? Was it the franking credits that cost Labor Bass and Braddon? Was it the capital gains tax discount that made the lowest income voters in Australia vote for the Liberals in the lowest income electorates? Or was it the Adani coal mine 4,000 kilometres away that cost Labor 2 seats in Tasmania that they didn't think they'd lose and they lost by 1 seat? So I'm sorry, you can't go through the whole thing, but you bet the lesson of the 2019 election is that Labor should never try and do anything useful ever again. And the only way to win office is by promising to do nothing. Who wins from that message? Who wins from that version of history? So there are lots of reasons Labor lost, but they lost Bass and Braddon in northern Tasmania. And if you can't explain why they lost those 2 seats, you can't explain how they lost the whole election. And I promise it wasn't franking credits. And I promise it wasn't the capital gains tax discount. I promise it wasn't their commitment to make cancer treatment free. Right? You know, so it's harder than, they tried to take. Oh, by the way, huge swings to Labor in all the now teal seats in the 2019 election. In the 2019 election, when Labor opposed the stage 3 tax cuts and wanted to get rid of capital gains tax discounts and reform franking credits, Labor's vote went up in Wentworth. It went up in North Sydney. It went up in Kooyong. It went up in all the high income seats that the Teals won at the last election. So I know that's the modern version of the 2019 election history. I would suggest to you it's radically wrong.
We've got 2 questions here. I'm wondering if we can ask them one after the other and then we'll try and answer them both and then wrap up. Thank you so much.
We've got this ghost of John Howard still hanging around with his dole bludgers, like you touched on before. The job seeker and the other Centrelink payments are well below the poverty line. How do we, this allergy that political parties seem to have to changing this, how do we undo that?
Thank you. And then your question?
Hi. Just wondering, where do unions sit within the current position of the Labor Party and the direction the economy is going? We know that you talked about there's no shortage of policy problems. The problem is established interests without counterweights in the political process.
Greg, do you want to take that one?
Yeah,
Last one
I'll
first?
handle the union one. Actually, we talk about learning lessons. One of the lessons the union movement learnt was actually from the 2007 election, where they campaigned mightily to rid work choices and thought, great, we've got a Labor government, happy times, and they kind of got screwed. The Fair Work Act basically did bugger all, just a lot of tinkering. And so this time around, I know very much within the Labor movement or the union movement, they weren't just about winning the election, they were about campaigning for actual changes of things once they got into government. And I think I think you can comfortably say that actually on IR, the government has actually shown some ambition. The changes that they've made to enterprise bargaining and allowing a sort of more collective bargaining for lower income groups is quite good. They've been pretty strong on campaigning for increased minimum wages, also sort of reducing some, they got rid of the APCC, whatever it was. Yeah, I think they actually have delivered on the IR and sort of, the employment white paper was actually a pretty good paper. It's the unfortunate thing they haven't followed through on it, but certainly there is a lot of stuff in there. But you're right, and it sort of goes into the next question of why haven't they done anything yet on employment services? They did something in the budget and it's just, again, tinkering. All their reports show it's terrible, needs massive reform. We need a CES or something. Instead, they're not quite there. But on the actual sort of the real sort of labour movement, the things for aged care workers, I think they've been quite good. And that, I think, comes about because the union movement were not going to be Kevin Rudded again. They were like, yep, we're going to work for you to get elected, but we're not going to stop pressuring you once you get there and sit back and wait for it. And I think that's kind of it's certainly something where we don't campaign for anyone, But it's not a case that we thought, oh, we got rid of Scott Morrison, now we'll just sit back and hope for good things. You know, you got to keep the pressure on, because you've got to care about ideals and policies, not, oh, we got our footy team elected.
And Richard, the ghost of John Howard.
Well, just quickly, I agree with everything Greg just said, and I think the union movement is actually really the only part of progressive Australia that's got much out of this government. I think the IR reforms have been quite good. I think some of the supports for really low-paid workers have been really quite good, and I'd suggest that that's simple because pressure works. And, you know, frankly, if you look at the response to last night's budget, there's a whole bunch of climate and environment groups going, oh, that's all right. Well, guess what you don't get? You don't get change if you just say thank you for nothing. So, yeah, I think the union movement have made it quite obvious to everyone. If you want a Labor government to get stuff done, get some pretty clear, ambitious commitments from them and hold them to it. Good on them for doing it. I'm glad they have. But I think the absence of reform in so many other spaces probably in part reflects a lack of pressure for that change. In terms of the ghost of John Howard, look, you know, I think John Howard was a very successful prime minister in terms of all of the objective criteria he'd set for himself. But one of the things that he did so much better, I think, than any prime minister in my lifetime was rewrite history. Like literally, like when I was growing up, the Australian flag was a bit embarrassing and we're all going to get rid of it soon and we're going to be a republic, and, you know, Anzac Day wasn't really that interesting. And John Howard literally rewrote our history. He militarized our history. He made young people quite conservative in many ways. He wasn't just introducing policies and tinkering with legislation. He was literally trying to reshape the country. He was trying to reshape the culture. He attacked the institutions that resisted him. He built institutions that are still implementing his agenda today. So, yeah, while we've got a government today that's like making little changes and promising to get things done by 2040, he was actually doing stuff in the here and now, and the stuff he did, he dug in deep. Right? He didn't create a fund for something and then hope a future government didn't ditch it. You know, he literally dug his changes in deep, legally, politically, and culturally. He was good at changing the country. Not for the better, from my point of view. No, but you can learn from what he did. And the fact that we're talking about the ghost of him tonight is proof that we need to learn from people like him. Because if you wish this government was doing things that 20 years later would be hard to change back, then you need to look at someone who did it well. And that was not Kevin Rudd. No, it wasn't, right? All the inquiries in the world don't get you the lasting change that Howard delivered. So, you know, you can learn from people even if you don't admire their achievements. His achievements on his own terms were quite spectacular. And the main one was get it done and dig it in deep. Don't have an inquiry and try not to upset anybody.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm feeling quite pessimistic now. I'm really sorry.
We just have to get our inner Howard out, and that's really a weird way to end it tonight. Like tonight, just release your inner John Howard, says Richard.
Take that positive message with you out into the world with love from the Australia Institute. No, please thank Richard Dennis and Greg Jericho. I also want to thank Verity Lane Market and personally commend to you the fried pork and prawn wontons from downstairs. Sorry, vegans, they were delicious. And I want to thank my wonderful colleagues, Hayden, Eleanor, and Andy, and everyone else who's come along tonight to help out this evening. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up already, to get our newsletter and to hear about future politics in the pub events. We've got a sheet where you can sign up the back. Next month, our Politics in the Pub is with Zoe Daniel, the independent member for Goldstein, and also a foreign correspondent of 20 years experience and the former ABC US correspondent. She's going to be talking with my colleague Emma Shortis about Australia's relationship with the United States. It's going to be a cracker. No Greater Ally, ? Is the title for that one. That's on Wednesday, the 5th of June at 6:30 p.m. right back here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. And don't forget to subscribe have a listen to Follow the Money, my podcast, and Dollars and Cents, Greg's podcast. You can find them wherever you normally listen to podcasts this week. Just if one night of budget bliss is not enough, there'll be 2 extra fantastic podcast episodes for you to get stuck into. So have a listen. And tomorrow we'll be talking to journalist Rachel Withers also about the fortnight in politics, which will include quite a bit of budget stuff as well. You can find all of that and more at australiainstitute.org.au. Thank you so much for participating in our democracy. As Richard said, these are democratic questions, not just economic and GDP questions. We love you all for coming out this evening to talk about the budget in depth. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. Thanks very much.